and yet that kind of creativity and ritual, you know, it came about. What about you? How was it all for you?
Yeah, I was about to say, actually, for the most part, I've been actually all right, you know, like touch wood, things have been all right. I mean, there was I had a bad incident at the start where I lost my granddad, unfortunately, at the start of the whole pandemic, which really broke my heart. I didn't even get to see him, unfortunately, but that really affected me. And I think because of that as well, and basically the whole world went on shutdown, basically. Luckily, I was working as a teacher, so in 2 different schools, so that kept my mind sane and focused on something as well. And it changed my whole outlook on life as well. I mean, I still run the hip hop orchestra as we talk, actually, but at the same time, I kind of lost my love for doing that, if that makes sense. So it's basically changed my whole outlook on life, like what's important to me, what do I love now, what do I want to focus on. And this is a big reason why I came up with the idea of Keep It 30 in the first place, actually, because I started my first main podcast was called the Hip Hop Orchestra Presents, which is like an extension of my orchestra. And I started that January of last year, actually, literally just before the pandemic hit. And I started that because obviously I adore the orchestra that I run. I adore it. I've lost a lot of love for it, unfortunately, recently because of the COVID, but still obviously love it. But the reason why I started the podcast was to kind of share stories of behind the scenes moments of how I deal with the orchestra, what my roles are, what we all do, share behind the scenes moments, the ups and downs, because I love sharing stories. I love stories. I love sharing them too. And I would always get a lot of the same sort of questions, like how did you start? Why did you start it? What were some of your favorite moments? You know what? I'm going to start a podcast and to answer all your questions in one go. So like one episode will be like who I am and what I do. The second episode will be like some of the best moments and the up and down moments, things that you don't always know about, because at the same time, you probably realize as well that you're an incredibly hard worker. I know that, and not everyone gets to see that, what you have to do in order to get to being successful, because looking at like some of the awards you've won, I mean, have been incredible. Like for instance, the being recognized as a Queen's Young Leader and the Winston Churchill thing. It's incredible, and I want to share these sort of moments to the wider audience. And when I started it, it felt like that was my calling in life, just talking to people and sharing stories. I thought this is my long lost calling in life. And I became obsessed with podcasting. I mean, I always loved stories anyway, obviously the story beforehand, but the minute I started getting into it and just talking to members of the orchestra family, to people I met along the way, sharing their stories as well, how they got to where they are in life, talking to like Grammy-winning composers, to incredible people like yourself, to the most successful musicians in the world, like I became obsessed with that. Like story-based conversation. I loved it. And I thought, you know what? I've listened to a million different podcasts, but I realized no one was actually doing one for schools or talking to the youth or young people about what they're going through. Because I know that you were a teacher for a couple of years yourself, actually, and obviously me being a teacher as well for many years. I would always take the time in my lessons, whether it's one-to-one or whole class, to see how the kids were, whether that's pre-pandemic or during pandemic. I would always take the time to see how the kids were. And I realized that would always help the kids dramatically, because I know from my personal experience, I hate, as much as I love education, I'm obsessed with education. I love to read, I love to listen to podcasts and learn as much as possible. I hated school. I mean, I hated it because I'm dyspraxic. So I find many things very difficult, whether that's like social skills or organizational skills or whatever it might be. I find a lot of things very, very difficult. But when I started doing podcasts, it dawned on me that I use my dyspraxia as an advantage, like my superpower, because it taught me to be a great listener. It taught me how to give great advice when people asked me. And I didn't realize that these were all great feats when it comes to podcast. To be a great podcaster, I feel, is to be a great listener, obviously. Know when to kind of jump in and talk, not interrupting every couple of seconds, I feel. but just obviously doing your research on people as well, and just making them feel as comfortable as possible. And I feel as through my dyspraxia that I learned all of these traits throughout my whole life. And like I was saying earlier, I feel like podcasting was my calling in life, and I want to create this amazing wealth of content to show that both adults and kids have their own problems. Let's talk it out now, and let's see if we can help each other out. And I've done a few episodes now with the kids at a school that I work at. Shout out to the Pavilion again, by the way, who they're preschool actually. You might know them. It's a school there where they've secondary school kids who have been expelled from mainstream schools. And on the front, obviously, a lot of people might think that, oh, they're expelled, they're really bad kids, or they got this preconception about them. Well, in fact, when you sit and talk with them, they're the most amazing kids. I mean, they're so creative, so passionate, and they're so clever, and they just need someone like us just to sit down and chat with them and to listen to them. And so each week I go down there with a different subject, whether it's like the effects of social media or knife crime, or the effects of things like drill music or like counterculture, and get their feedback on different things. Like, what do you guys feel about this kind of stuff? Is it affecting you, both physically and mentally, and And like, for instance, when we'll talk about social media, like they're at an age where they're seeing things on social media thinking, oh, I should get Botox now, I should get surgery now, I should get this. And I'm talking thinking, how does that make you feel and why? And And once you just sit back, once you ask a question like that and just sit back, it gets the ball rolling. And they're so amazing with what they come out thinking, my God, they're so clever. And I just absolutely love it. I think, you know what, I'm onto a winner here. And I just want to help as many kids as possible now, like just to help with them and guide them if I can, and educate them as much as possible, and guide them into a career that I know that they were amazing at. So that's why I started doing it. It's just been the best thing ever. So I've done over 100 episodes on Hip Hop Orchestra Presents podcast, and this will be, I think, episode 8-ish. I think it's like kind of pre or post Christmas. I'm not sure when it'll come out exactly, but it's just been my calling in life. I've literally loved every single minute now. And I left my teaching job in July of this year, 2021, to focus on this actually, and it's been one of the best decisions I've made. I mean, I adore teaching, but it's just, I felt like sometimes school life, whether you're both a teacher and a student, it kind of compresses the way you kind of work, the way you learn, and the way you teach as well, because obviously, as we all know, everyone learns in a different way. So as a teacher, you got to look, what I realize is a good teacher is someone that can notice that and teach in a way that the student learned, get them excited to learn, and read to that extra time just to find how they learn, see how they are, and teach them in a way that they all really love it. And I realized that because of my way of teaching is very modern, it's very fun, it's very exciting. I get the kids really hyped up and wanting to learn. Well, schools didn't always appreciate that. You're like, you must teach this way, or you're not a good teacher. I'm thinking, what the hell are you talking about? The kids are loving it and they're doing so well with me. What's wrong with my way of teaching? It's like telling Ronaldo, who scores like 100 goals a year, you're a crap footballer, by the way, because you didn't score my way. Like it's like,
yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's.
I suppose it's a tricky one, isn't it? When you have a clash of culture between how a teacher wants to teach and how a school imagines learning to be. And yeah, it's something that I say to, or I find myself talking about with lots of teachers, that there might be a school out there for you, you know, and it really strikes, like, I'm lucky enough to go into lots of different schools, and it really strikes me how different they all are. You know, they've all got different personalities and different histories, and yeah, it can be really hard when the school has got a vision of how they want to teach, and a teacher's individual vision of how they want to teach doesn't match up with that. And I hear you on that. And I was really struck by what you were talking about in terms of the power of stories. And you know, I'm really just imagining how it might be for someone listening to Keep It 30 and hearing from students on topics. And that person that's listening might have never heard anyone talk about that topic before. Or they might not have talked to someone of that age since they were last that age.
That's what I mean. Because to me, it's such an obvious thing to do. Like, I feel I'm 33 now, so I like to feel like I'm at an age where I'm still young enough to talk to kids on their level, but at the same time, I'm experienced enough to think, okay, I was your age that many years ago, so I know what that life is like, and you should do, and this is how I would do things, and let's get your feedback on different subjects. And that's why I'm so appreciative of people like yourself who share on like social media, thinking this is exactly what we need now. They're such amazing kids. Let's just listen to them now and get their feedback and things and see how we can help them so much. And I've, like I said, like a million times already, that I feel like it's my calling in life, just to go in there and talk to the kids and hopefully inspire them as much as possible. I've loved every single minute of it.
Yeah, it's so true. I often leave a school having met with some teachers, met with some people who are in a family, met with a child or a young person, and I often leave having learned something, you know, and it's really, I find it really interesting taking the points of view of, for example, a child, you know, somebody, let's say 6 or 7 years old, and taking their perspective of the world and kind of putting it into my framework of how I see the world. And it's really, it's always really striking to me how much wisdom there can be in the perspective of a child. So they might not have lots of important knowledge about the world that we would like them to have, but they can sometimes cut straight to the center of an issue. Like, why don't you just say this? But you're like, why don't I just say that?
Because that's what I love about kids, is like they're just so straight to the point with things. Like, you don't like beat around the bush. Like, I think, like you just said, like, why don't you say it this way or do that? Like, okay, that's brilliant. I just love that brutal honesty of kids. They don't beat around the bush, just straight to the point. I mean, you said a great point there about kids teaching us so much. I mean, I was going to ask if they taught you so much in your job. Actually, they must have taught you so much.
Do you know what? Like, one of the cliche lines that psychologists always say to each other is, you've got to adopt a stance of curiosity. And what they mean by that is, like, let's not judge people. Let's try and understand their point of view of the world, and let's try and center that in the work, right? So, you know, I meet someone who's totally different from me, and my aim is to try and understand not my view of them, but their view of the situation, and to try and put it through as little of a filter from me as possible. So, like, let me understand how you view school and how you view your family, and then that's a great foundation for us to try and create a plan together about how to try and make things better. And the reason I always laugh when psychologists talk about curiosity is that we have all these tools and tricks and techniques to try and avoid bias or avoid becoming cynical or judgment, and to remain truly curious about a situation. And that's something that is so effortless to children. And it's almost like the older you get, the more effort it takes, because if you think about a baby, they cannot not be curious. They're just amazed by the fact that they've got a foot, and they're like holding their foot and they're moving it, and it's like the best thing ever. And then they're amazed by the fact that you rustled something on the table, and they want to know, can you do it? You do it again. They're like, wow, you just rustled it again. And yeah, that curiosity is something that when I see it, I take it as a reminder that for some people it's just really easy to access that way of being. And yeah, that's one thing that I feel like I'm always being reminded of by children, is just stay curious. And I think I'm trying to think of other things that I've been taught by children. But I mean, something that comes to mind is quite often people will tell you what they need if you ask them. And that's something that I find quite humbling, but also really useful. So, you know, quite regularly, there'll be a situation where I'll talk to the adults, and, you know, that might be school staff, it might be a social worker, it might be the family, it might be another professional, and they all feel really stuck. They're like, we don't know how to improve the situation. And then I talk to a child or a young person, and I'm not saying this happens every time that they just give me the answer, but I've got, you know, a few really strong memories of spending a few hours talking to a child or young person, and being like, they've literally told me what they need and what they're finding difficult. And then you feed it back to the adults in the situation. They're like, wow, they just told you that. And I'm like, yeah, did you not ask? You know, and that's not, I don't mean that in like a patronizing way, but sometimes adults care so much they don't do the obvious thing, which is just to ask the child or the young person. And yeah, I think that for me is like a powerful lesson, that sometimes, you know, you're trying to do all the complicated stuff, and actually you just need to ask. You just need to genuinely ask the person, like, what's up and what do you need?